You would think the absolute best time to figure out an emergency plan is when everyone is like laser focused on an actual emergency.
Right, right. That makes intuitive sense.
But today we're going to explore why a crisis is, neurobiologically speaking, the absolute worst time to try and make a decision.
Oh, without a doubt.
We have a really fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive for you today. We're looking at a strategic guide that's entirely focused on building school crisis response plans before the alarms ever sound.
Which is crucial.
Yeah, and we're looking at that alongside some highly specific programmatic data on K-12 mental health support in Georgia through an organization called MentalSpace School.
It's a really interesting pairing of sources.
It really is. So our mission today is to figure out what separates a functional crisis architecture from, a useless binder just collecting dust on a shelf. Okay, let's unpack this.
I love that framing.
Okay.
Because that distinction is essentially the difference between a system that absorbs shock and a system that just, that shatters.
Right.
Most districts, they have something written down, obviously. But the critical vulnerability in almost all of them is that they're designed for this utopian version of a crisis.
A crisis where everything goes perfectly.
Exactly. They assume every staff member is present, everyone is well-rested, resources are fully available.
Which never happens.
Never. We really need to look at why human psychology causes those perfect world plans to just collapse under real-world pressure.
Yeah, because the source text gives us a very specific, incredibly grounded scenario to illustrate that collapse. It's not some hypothetical movie plot.
No, it's very mundane.
Picture this. It is 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The school day is winding down. The buses are starting to idle outside.
Everyone is exhausted.
Exactly. The staff is operating on that mid-afternoon fatigue. And right at that exact moment, a student sitting in front of you discloses something incredibly serious.
A nightmare scenario.
Right. Maybe they indicate they're a danger to themselves. And to complicate matters, the primary school counselor happens to be out sick today. So now, 3 different people are standing in your doorway, staring at you, just waiting for a decision.
That 2:15 p.m. detail is so vital because it completely strips away the illusion of ideal conditions.
It really does.
The fatigue is real. The absentee staff member is honestly a statistical probability. And the pressure is immediate.
Yeah.
If a school's crisis plan relies on the head counselor always being in their office at the exact moment a student hits a breaking point,
It's doomed from the start.
functionally broken before it even begins.
It reminds me of how we treat fire drills. We practice walking out the main exit, gathering on the football field, checking our little boxes.
Right.
But that entirely ignores what happens if the main exit is the part of the building that is actually on fire.
Precisely. The plan is brittle.
So brittle. But let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If you are an observer of the education system, shouldn't trained professionals just, trust their in-the-moment judgment? We are talking about educators and administrators with decades of combined experience. Why can't we rely on their professional intuition to navigate a student disclosure as it happens?
What's fascinating here is that the source text explicitly warns against relying on that intuition.
Really? Explicitly?
Yes, and it comes down strictly to the neurobiology of stress. Thresholds that you leave to in-the-moment judgment will inherently shift under pressure.
Because of the adrenaline.
Exactly. When adrenaline floods the system, your brain's prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for complex planning, logic, objective decision-making, is essentially bypassed.
Wow. So it's like your computer's RAM gets completely maxed out by the adrenaline spike.
That's a great way to put it.
The system can't process the complex software of the prefrontal cortex, so it defaults to the basic primitive hardware just to keep the machine running.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. Your brain shuts down the slow analytical processing because it literally thinks you need to react to a predator.
Oh.
You revert to fight, flight, or freeze. So if you are relying on in-the-moment judgment at 2:15 p.m. when a child's safety is on the line,
You're in trouble.
you are relying on a cognitively compromised system. This is where the gap between a written plan and human behavior becomes a massive liability.
Makes sense.
Expecting flawless human intuition during a panic is, it's the primary way critical details fall through the cracks.
Okay, so if in-the-moment judgment is compromised by our own biology, and relying on perfect staffing is a total fantasy,
Yeah.
it seems like the only way to survive a crisis is to remove decision-making entirely.
Have to.
You would almost need an architecture that dictates behavior before the environment ever turns chaotic.
which requires dismantling the way most schools currently assign responsibility.
How so?
Well, the text highlights that assigning roles to a job title is a massive failure point. A functional plan doesn't say, the principal will contact the family. It demands named individuals and named backups. It has to say, Sarah will contact the family. If Sarah's is absent, David will contact the family.
Because if the plan just says the principal, and the principal is, at a district meeting across town.
You suddenly have a vacuum.
Right.
And nature abhors a vacuum. What happens next is a psychological phenomenon called diffusion of responsibility.
Oh, where everyone thinks someone else is handling it.
Exactly. Everyone in the room assumes someone else is acting as the principal's proxy.
Ah.
The assistant principal thinks the counselor is calling the parents, the counselor thinks the school nurse is doing it, and ultimately, nobody does it.
That is terrifying.
By mandating a named person and a named backup for every single role, you completely remove the cognitive load of having to figure out the chain of command while your brain is maxed out on adrenaline.
It eliminates the friction of delegation.
Precisely.
Which brings up the next logical hurdle. Even if Sarah knows she is the one making the call, how does she know when the situation is severe enough to warrant it? Because if we can't trust our intuition under stress, we have to establish written escalation thresholds.
These thresholds act as the anchor when the emotional waters get rough.
Okay.
The document has to explicitly state, if a student discloses X, we immediately trigger action Y. It completely removes the debate.
So no guessing.
Right. There's no calling a quick huddle in the hallway to gauge how everyone feels about the student's comment. The threshold is breached, the action happens.
Got it.
By deciding the severity of an action in a calm state of mind months before the crisis, you protect the response from the distortion of panic.
Okay, so we have named roles to stop the diffusion of responsibility, and we have written thresholds to bypass the paralyzed prefrontal cortex.
Yes.
But the source text points out another massive blind spot in how we think about crises.
The aftermath.
Yes. We tend to view a crisis like a movie with a clear ending, right? The immediate danger passes, the credits roll, and everything just resets.
If only it were that simple.
Right. But the reality is that the aftermath is often where secondary crises ignite. Let's talk about the reentry process.
This is such a critical transition point. Let's say a student was hospitalized for a severe mental health crisis.
Okay.
Their return to the academic and social environment of a school is incredibly delicate.
Very fragile.
If the school treats a crisis as over just because the student is back in the building, they are setting that student up for a rapid relapse.
Because without a defined reentry process, it is just improvisational chaos.
Absolutely.
You have teachers awkwardly pretending nothing happened, or perhaps well-meaning staff members offering accommodations that completely conflict with the student's clinical needs.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
The student is walking back into a maze without a map.
The mechanism of a proper reentry protocol ensures that the student is caught by a coordinated safety net.
A safety net. I like that.
It means the teachers, the administration, and the clinical team are all perfectly aligned on the specific academic adjustments, the behavioral warning signs to watch for, and the communication strategy.
So everyone is on the same page.
Exactly. It bridges the gap between the clinical environment of a hospital and the social environment of a classroom.
And, if you're listening to this and you work in management anywhere, not just a school, you know what happens when you treat your team like shock absorbers for a crisis without giving them a chance to decompress.
Oh, they break.
They break. This brings us to a part of the text that honestly blew me away. The absolute mandate for a staff debrief.
Crucial.
The plan cannot just cover the student, it has to cover the adults who manage the emergency.
Skipping the staff debrief is a fundamental failure of leadership.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
It is, but it's true. When an educator or administrator navigates a life or death situation with a student, they are absorbing massive amounts of secondary trauma.
Yeah, of course.
The adrenaline spike we discussed earlier doesn't just vanish when the bell rings.
But the expectation so often is that these educators will manage a suicidal ideation at 2:15 p.m., go home, sleep it off, and come back the next morning to enthusiastically teach algebra as if they aren't carrying a massive psychological weight.
And the source text points out that this mechanical dismissive treatment is exactly why experienced professionals burn out and leave the education field entirely.
I don't blame them.
Right. It is fundamentally about staff survival. A mandatory debrief isn't just a feel-good exercise, it is a structural mechanism.
To process what just happened.
Exactly. to process trauma, evaluate the effectiveness of the response, and validate the immense psychological toll the crisis took on the responders.
Yeah.
If your architecture doesn't actively protect the well-being of the people executing the plan, you are inevitably going to run out of people.
That is a harsh reality, but it tracks perfectly with the psychology of workplaces. Now, everything we've unpacked so far,
The internal stuff.
right, naming specific backups, writing rigid thresholds, mapping out student reentry, and mandating staff debriefs, these are all internal protocols.
Things a school can control.
A school district can build those inside their own walls with their own personnel, but the source material introduces a final, non-negotiable requirement that forces schools to look outward.
Same-day clinical access.
Exactly.
Because internal protocols eventually hit a wall.
Right.
I mean, a school counselor can de-escalate a situation, and an administrator can secure a building, but neither are necessarily equipped or licensed to provide long-term intensive psychiatric intervention.
It's beyond their skirt.
Way beyond. The crisis plan is only as strong as the referral pathway it connects to.
And the text argues aggressively that if a school's referral pathway results in a 2-week APAX, wait for a student to see a therapist.
Which is common.
It is. But the text says that is functionally a gap, not a plan. A 2-week holding pattern for a teenager in the middle of a mental health crisis is an eternity.
Absolutely an eternity.
It is an unacceptable window of risk where the situation can easily escalate into a tragedy. But we also know that mental health resources are notoriously stretched thin, especially in the K-12 environment.
This is the systemic bottleneck. Recognizing that you need same-day clinical access is easy. Actually securing it when the broader healthcare system is overwhelmed is the real challenge.
Which brings up the central question for anyone looking at the logistics of this. How do districts actually achieve this same-day access?
Right.
How do they bridge the gap between their internal protocols and the external healthcare system? This is where the second half of our source material becomes a crucial case study, detailing the model used by MentalSpace School in Georgia.
It's a fascinating model.
They partner directly with districts to build the clinical side of prevention and response, ensuring a licensed clinician is available exactly when that 2:15 p.m. crisis hits.
It represents a massive shift from relying on fragmented, ad hoc community referrals to actually integrating a dedicated external infrastructure. They aren't just dropping a counselor into an empty room. They're providing an entire ecosystem of care that plugs directly into the school's internal escalation thresholds.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the sheer breadth of their offerings is wild.
Yeah, it's comprehensive.
We are talking about same-day teletherapy, dedicated therapist teams assigned per school, crisis intervention, suicide and violence prevention programs, staff wellness support, and even family counseling.
All under one umbrella.
Right. But having a massive menu of services means absolutely nothing if the friction to access them is too high for the average family.
And that is the pragmatic barrier that derails most mental health initiatives.
Always.
You have to analyze how a service physically reaches a student. MentalSpace addresses the logistics head-on by attacking two specific barriers:
What are they?
cultural friction and financial friction. First, they utilize diverse, culturally competent, licensed therapists.
Which is so important.
The mechanism here is simple, but profound. Therapeutic outcomes improve drastically when students feel understood by someone who can relate to their lived experience or cultural background.
It builds trust faster.
Exactly. It reduces the initial resistance to therapy.
But the financial friction is usually the ultimate deal breaker.
Oh, absolutely.
If a family is struggling to pay rent, a $150 therapy copay is a non-starter, no matter how badly the student needs help.
Which is why the financial model outlined in the source is so critical. They completely remove that barrier. For Medicaid patients, the cost is $0.
$0.
Zero. That's huge.
And rather than just catering to a niche demographic, they cast an incredibly wide net across the commercial insurance market as well.
Right, because looking at the list, they accept BCVS, Cigna, Aetna, UHC, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, and AmeriGroup.
Pretty much everyone.
By blanketing the coverage, everything from Medicaid to major commercial providers, they are ensuring that the vast majority of the student body can actually utilize this same-day access without bankrupting their families.
It's brilliant. It takes the whole financial debate out of the crisis response.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this kind of integrated model is happening against the backdrop of rapidly evolving school mental health legislation in Georgia.
Ah, okay.
Districts are under intense pressure both ethically and from a statutory perspective, to prove they have robust, actionable support systems in place.
But the source text draws a very clear boundary there. It is not suggesting that bringing in an external provider magically absolves a school district of its legal responsibilities.
Not at all. It is a vital distinction.
Right.
MentalSpace operates with strict HIPAA and FERPA compliance, meaning they adhere to the federal privacy laws governing medical and educational records.
Of course.
They handle the clinical readiness, they provide the licensed professionals and the therapeutic infrastructure.
Okay.
But the text is explicit that districts must consult their own legal counsel regarding their specific statutory obligations under state law.
So the school district is the architect who has to make sure the building is up to code with the state, and MentalSpace is the highly specialized contractor brought in to handle the clinical electricity.
That's a perfect analogy.
They provide the therapists, but the district still owns the overall policy compliance.
That boundary actually mirrors the very first rule of the crisis plan we discussed earlier: clearly defined roles.
Oh, yeah.
The partnership only works when both the district and the clinical provider know exactly where their responsibilities begin and end.
It all connects back to structure. And speaking of structure, I want to look at what happens when all of these mechanisms, the named roles, the thresholds, the reentry plans, and the same-day clinical access, actually work together.
The results.
The results. The reported program outcomes from the MentalSpace school case study are honestly staggering. They report an 89% improvement in attendance among participants.
That metric alone fundamentally changes the trajectory of a school. Chronic absenteeism is rarely just about a student not wanting to learn. It is overwhelmingly a direct mechanism of untreated mental health struggles.
That makes a lot of sense.
Severe anxiety, depression, trauma. These manifest as school avoidance. When you integrate same-day clinical access, you are finally treating the root cause of the absence rather than just punishing the symptom.
You're fixing the actual problem.
If you treat the anxiety, the student can actually physically show up to the building.
And the data supports that exact mechanism. They report 92% reduced anxiety among the participating students,
Incredible.
along with an 85% family satisfaction rate. Those aren't just, incremental bumps. Those are transformative numbers.
They really are.
It proves that when you move from a theoretical binder on a shelf to an active, integrated clinical readiness model, the entire ecosystem of the school gets healthier.
It functionally shifts the district from a reactive posture to a proactive one.
Yes.
They aren't just holding their breath waiting for a crisis to happen and then scrambling to find a phone number. They have an architecture that absorbs the shock because the support mechanisms, both internal protocols and external clinical access, are already running in the background.
So what does this all mean for you? Let's synthesize the journey we've just been on.
That's it.
We started in that high-stakes moment of panic 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, an absent counselor, a critical student disclosure, and a room full of people waiting for a decision.
The worst-case scenario.
We unpacked the neurobiology of why relying on perfect conditions or trusting in the moment judgment is just a recipe for catastrophic failure.
We move through the mechanics of building a system that actually survives that panic.
Right.
Defining specific names and backups to defeat the diffusion of responsibility, setting rigid escalation thresholds while everyone is still calm.
Before the adrenaline hits.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
Building reentry protocols to prevent secondary crises when a student returns, and mandating staff debriefs to ensure the educators absorbing all this trauma don't burn out and walk away from the profession.
And finally, we saw how the gap between those internal plans and actual clinical care is being bridged in Georgia. We looked at how schools are moving beyond that totally unacceptable 2-week wait list,
Yeah.
utilizing comprehensive infrastructure like MentalSpace School to guarantee that culturally competent, financially accessible care is available the exact same day it is needed.
Because a plan isn't a functional plan if it only works on a perfect day.
Right. It has to be engineered to work on the absolute worst day. Now, for those in Georgia who want to dive deeper into the source's programmatic specifics, you can find their information at mentalspaceschool.com or reach out to MentalSpace School at genesheettherapy.com.
We've seen how essential it is to define roles, set non-negotiable thresholds before emotions run high, and mandate debriefs to protect the people on the front lines. But this framework extends far beyond the walls of a school. Look at your own life, your workplace, your management style, or even your family's emergency plan.
That's a good point.
Are your personal crisis protocols relying on perfect conditions and flawless in-the-moment judgment? Or do you have your own 2.15 on a Tuesday architecture ready for when the adrenaline hits.